This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Она образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, your skin's beautiful.
Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Xirtus. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Xirtus.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
What up, my brothers and sisters in Christ? Good to see you. How's it going? So we got Giant back. Giant, how you been?
I'm not muted, right?
No, I can hear you. Yeah.
Awesome. I've been good. How you guys been?
We're stoked. Do you want to say, Raph? Here, I'll mute.
We're chilling. It's good. Weather is good. Food is good. It's all good here in Montenegro.
You'd be stoked. We're like on the vegetarian wave recently, like the Essenes, like John the Baptist and Jesus, you know, like which is a Giant is a vegetarian as well. Hitler was a vegetarian.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding again. Like, I just want to make people feel bad. Jeremy Fawcett, 199 to start the stream. That's pretty good. Based. How's it going? Sweet.
Nice.
Well, we wanted to talk about the Son of Man, and this is something the Giant was like kind of interested in talking about. We were bringing this up like a week ago or a couple days ago. This like thought came up because people like kept talking about the Son of God versus the Son of Man and what all that means. And Jesus, you know, he refers to himself as like Son of Man in the Bible is translated. It's originally Ben Adam, which means like descendant of Adam or something like basically. So I thought that'd be like an interesting place to spiral. And yeah, Giant, maybe you wanted to talk about what you wanted to talk about today.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that there's, you know, obviously a lot of different ways of looking at what was meant out of that title, Son of Man, right? And obviously Jesus was said to have said that he was the Son of God. I don't personally believe that he meant it and that he was specifically the one and only Son of God, but we can go into that. But
just real quickly, because as soon as you say that, there's going to be some triggered in the audience. It's like, hey, like we're going to explain the nuance of that, but particularly why, you know, for instance, like John 3:16, people are going to say like, oh, that's this. He says he's the only Son of God. Read it again. It says he's the only begotten Son of God, the only begotten Ben Adam, and so begotten also means like physically born a certain way or begot. Like there's a difference in interpretation from like the NIV. Like so many of like the Protestant Christians have like this new translation, which just like tosses words out. It gets rid of the word begotten. It doesn't really explain what that meant in Aramaic and Greek and Hebrew. So yeah, sorry, but continue.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, a lot of the things that I believe and I say about what it is, and you know, as we get into this conversation, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be upset about the way that I'm going to, you know, frame it out and try to explain what it is that I think is really going on with the character that we call Jesus, right? He may or may not have been actually born in real life, Yeshua, right? I think he probably was, but I don't think that I think the evidence can be argued both ways. I've seen a lot of people that, you know, go dive into the history of it, and a lot of it's convoluted by the Greek stuff, and you know, they're not. What we got to understand is that there's evil that has been in control of this world, because things that can dominate will dominate no matter what, and they're going to go in and corrupt always. There was empires that were known to be very corrupted, that were involved in all these areas. And so, you know, I think, you know, the audience will probably understand that we have to go through and be very discerning with the way that we look at the information, and that, you know, a lot of people have argued different points, and people have heard those points and they feel like, oh, that makes sense and all this stuff. So there's always going to be some sort of conflict on what it is that is true or not true, and people have evidence to show that a lot of that stuff could have been faked, could have been manipulated. So I don't really want to kind of try to prove those things out, because I'm not a scholar in any of those ways, but I've heard many of the scholarly you know, information be argued out between people, and so I have my own idea of what it is that I think this, I would call it a character, is. Because if you look at all the other, if you look at all the other religions and spiritual systems and stuff like that, they have a very similar character. And I think that if you just look at those characters in general and what it is that they're trying to talk about, then that's the best way to try to understand this thing, instead of saying this one's holier than this one and this one's this or that. I think that there's lies involved with all of it, and I think some of it is actually done by secret societies that are trying to keep this character safe too. I think that this is a character that does show up, and I think that they have to throw humanity off the tracks, because who really runs humanity is the same thing that dominates. And it's kind of like a character that is a twin of it in a way, and it's a fight that's meant to happen, and one brother's given all the dominance kind of profile, and the other is given you know, more fairness and balance. And so the way that the battle is going to happen is that the one has to come in and figure out a way to bring the dominant one down in a very systematic, structured, and over time way. It's got to figure out how to get wise enough to fix the issue. So
yeah, the meek shall inherit the earth and all that. And like, someone just asked, we're going to talk about different religious things today. Are we coming at this from a Mormon angle? And like, this is not a Mormon theology or anything like that. Actually, Giant was raised, would you say, like you're like a, you know, kind of into Eastern religion a lot now, but like your family, your Christian family were like Jehovah's Witness, right? I think originally.
Yeah, so I come from the Rogers family, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And so they were he was the original Protestant martyr during the Queen Elizabeth's time, killed by her sister before she came to reign. So he was originally Catholic, then he went Protestant. My dad's side of the family is Italian and Portuguese, and they're Catholic background, but it wasn't practiced by the time I was born. And then my grandparents on my mother's side stayed Protestant, and they were actually introduced to the Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff through another Protestant part of our family, which was the Newkirks. So I have a little bit of that mix, but I have just California family kind of thing. I mean, they're originally from the East Coast, my grandparents, but they came over to California, first into Hollywood, Laurel Canyon kind of area, and then because my grandfather was in the military, and then they came up to the Bay Area, and that's where I was raised and where my mother met my father. And so we're kind of also influenced by all the things of California, New Age, hippie, you know, every type of religion and spiritual system there is. We get a little bit of all of it here. It's a mixture. Yeah.
Legit. And I know, Raphael, you're not like super Catholic, right? You weren't raised super Catholic or anything. Do you have like a religious background that you would cite in your resume? What would you say?
Yes, I would say I have none, basically. So I was not raised religiously. My only exposure to religion or to being at any church mass service actually was with the Boy Scouts, which also exist in Austria. And at some point they drag you, or I'll drag you, you get to visit church. And the only thing I distinctively remember there is that the priest didn't want to give me, how do you call it, the wafer, which is supposed to represent even the flesh of Jesus Christ. I'm not even sure. But yeah, I wasn't too sad not to be able to participate in that. I just found it kind of hilarious to be like, well, I'm also here. Maybe I'm not baptized or something, but why shouldn't I just be allowed to participate in that? I found that curious.
I got kicked out of Catholic school. My mom put me into a Catholic school, and they were passing around the wafer and I guess a little grape juice or something like that. And because I complained that they wouldn't give me some, they told my mom that I was like rebellious or something like that. And then she was just like, well, then if you can't handle them just asking for something simple like that, then she argued with them. They kicked me out somehow, or she took me out. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird that they won't give you. It's like, like, why can't I have some? They look like a little cracker or something. I'm like,
no, because the thing is, like, even if you want me to join or anything, wouldn't I understand there would be certain rules and so on, all right, but in a way, if you want to make it appealing, wouldn't you try to involve someone as much as possible, even if they're just there randomly for the ritual, right?
Yeah.
So I find that interesting. We've recently been to a mosque, actually, and there, at least the liberal imam there seemed very chill, very cool, and didn't have any problem if any of us would have wanted to participate exactly as fully as the others there did. So
yeah, I've been to Hindu temples and all kinds of stuff, and they gave me food immediately. Like,
yeah, I know that Catholics can be kind of weird about, like, so I was raised Catholic, I was educated in like Jesuit schools, and they were trying to be welcoming to people that weren't, at least in my Vatican II California reality. They were like, at least if you can't take the Eucharist today, which wasn't just for non-Catholics, by the way, like there's been situations where you didn't confess your sins, so you weren't ready to take confession, right? You weren't ready to take Eucharist. So you could be Catholic your whole life, and then this week you missed confession. I went once with Seamus in the East Coast to it, and they didn't want to do the Eucharist for him because he hadn't confessed his sins yet. So there are, like, I think there's like different perspectives, at least from different priests, like class on that. Like the Jesuits, I think, are a bit more open and believe you can do some forgiveness yourself, but a lot of people believe you need a priest to actually like forgive your sins so that you're ready to, and you have to do that regularly, which to me seems kind of scary, because like, what if you miss it and then you die and you can't, like, right before you die pray to ask forgiveness or something like that. So there's like just some weird things about the Catholics. I know the Orthodox have their own approach to it as well, because it's a substantiation, whether they represent, some people think it just represents the blood and body of Christ, but others are like, dude, this is magically now transformed into the body of Christ. And that's a whole like 3rd century idea that, that it's not that Christ was teaching you how to work together, but that you need to eat Christ. I don't think the whole idea of Christ not having any sort of sacrifices, there's no videos of Christ doing sacrifices. There's no Bible verses talking about Christ doing sacrifices. There's a lot of verses about Christ forgiving people without ever them doing a sacrifice. So there's this push that you don't need to do sacrifice in order. That's what Jesus was teaching, right? Like, you don't need to kill an animal to be forgiven. And that's a major transformation away from the Pharisee church, for sure. Like the Sadducees and the people at the time were the Aaronic priesthood. And they were always like, they still are today. Like the Cohen priesthood still wants you to like kill a chicken over the head of a kid in order to forgive a Jewish child, who's like eating candy or something like that. But there's also, like, I was going to say, there's this Yale course. I remember, it's weird because it's episode 13 of all numbers, the historical Jesus. And it goes pretty deep in, it's, I think interesting that I don't think a Christian, I think he's an atheist. And he's explaining how he believes Jesus existed, because there was a push in the Soviet Union to say that Jesus was completely just mythos, but in that there was no truth to it whatsoever. But actually, he's saying, hey, there's tons of evidence that there was a character, there was a person named Yeshua who, you know, we have Roman census, there were people like Pontius Pilate, we know characters around him. And so we accept whether or not we accept he's the Son of God or the Son of Man or anything like that.
Can I add a little something to that?
For sure.
This is going to probably piss off the community right away, or at least some of them, right? Because they just don't like the vegetarian thing. But there is a guy. His name is like James Tabor or something like that, and he's a scholar. He's got his own channel, but he also has been on something Gnostics show, a couple different people that dig into the Gnostic stuff and all that. But he believes, and he shows with pretty good evidence, that the real translation of what Jesus was saying when here you eat of my body and drink of my blood, that they were sacrificing during that. It was during the
Passover,
the wedding party or something like that, right? Where he turned the water into wine and all that, as far as I remember. And they were offering him meat and blood, and he was a vegetarian. And he said, no, this bread is my flesh. That's the flesh that I eat. And this wine is the blood that I drink. And so that's why they used that from there. But then it got turned, you know, obviously people in control didn't want that to be passed on, because then they couldn't get away with, you know, eating flesh and blood if they were Jesus followers.
Yeah, totally. And like oh, so you're gonna say that?
I just want to say that's a take I can really appreciate. And Andreas just recently mentioned this again, that the Essenes apparently were vegetarians, and who knows how many of these other officially disconnected sects who may actually all have been part of the same one originally. That's an interesting take.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to push that a little bit harder. So the Essenes are really interesting because when you look at I think the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you start to like check out the Qumran documents and everything that they have, what's interesting is, you know, I wanted to go back for a second. Like when you talk about the history of Jesus and the historicity of Jesus, like if this person existed, a lot of the books they're posting to are books that have been changed over the last 1,000 years. And this might seem like not that big of a deal to some people, but it's a bigger deal if you think about why Muslims exist, why Jews still aren't all Christians, why Christianity has so many schisms, why the Catholic Church was forging documents like the Pseudo-Isidore Decree, Pseudo-Isidore. If you look up the false decretals, which were designed to make the Catholic Church seem like the most relevant church. And we now know these were complete frauds. You can go look at them and see that they were basically coffee-stained papers to look like they were hundreds of years older than they were, that justified the Bishop of Rome after the Catholic and the Orthodox Church had to leave Istanbul, which was no longer Constantinople, right? But the other one is even just looking at like Josephus. There's major chunks of Josephus that are changed. There's the Johannine comma is a major one. Like Trinitarians love to point to 1 John 5:7 that they say has this whole thing about for these three agree, the spirit and the water and the blood. And then they change it in the 14th century. And a lot of people like the King James Bible, the Erasmus Bible, most people's Bibles today have this change from the 14th century that make it about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, which is not there at all. It's completely added within the last 6 centuries. But most people don't know that, and they think that their Bible is like this recitation of, which is what the Quran means, recitation. So a lot of Christians come from Protestants that were originally Janissaries, which were the Muslim tax that the Christians were actually giving their sons to the Muslims. And so they were educated by Muslims. So they had this whole understanding of what Jesus was based on what Islam was teaching them. And this makes its way into modern Christianity. So many Christians don't realize half the things that they believe come not from Judaism, not from Christians, but come from being conquered by Muslims within the last 1,000 years. It completely changed everything they believe. But when you look at the Qumran document, one of the things that really stands out, because there's a lot of Dead Sea Scrolls, is that they're supposed to be from the Essenes, but a lot of them are written on lambskin, right? On vellum and on this, like on hides. And that's really weird because Essenes did not use hides. They would not wear clothes that were made from hide. They wouldn't eat animals. They wouldn't perform sacrifices. They wouldn't write on hide. They would use papyrus. So the only documents that people would, I mean, certain scholars have pointed this out, like either these documents don't come from the Essenes and therefore come from someone else probably later. Maybe they're duplicated on vellum from later groups, or they're changed, which is the other thing, is they're changed because the Essenes didn't believe those things to begin with. And they have a completely different story about Yeshua as a rabbi who was, you know, following the traditions of his tribe. He wasn't part of the tribe of Levi, so he wasn't part of the Aaronic priests, which are the ones, like the Aaronic priests were the Sadducees and Pharisees. The Levi priests were doing the sacrifices. And they still are. The Cohen priests today do the chicken thing, kill the lamb, are going to kill the red heifer in Israel. But this is not what the Essenes did. Essenes would have included John the Baptist, who was saying you need to wash yourself, you need to repent, and you need to be saved. And and other groups that were part of that tribe would have been part of the tribe of Judah, Judah being one of the brothers of Israel, the son of Jacob, right? One of the 12 sons, like Joseph, Judah, etc. And so Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah, and it's mentioned this multiple times, at least in the Bible. They say, they don't say he comes from the tribe of Levi, they say he comes from the tribe of Judah. But also similarly, the last part I was going to say is Mary Magdalene also. Mary Magdalene would have also been part of the tribe of Judah and Essene. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention just really fast that also, right, Jacob is the one that is able to access through his pillow stone, you know, this ladder that goes from heaven down into hell, obviously, right? You can scale this ladder, which is a very mercurial. They're of the magic and Mercury related groups that, you know, go back further into Egypt and all that stuff, right? That line. They're somehow able, you know, even Enoch is known to be able to, or the different prophets that come through that line, able to talk to God, right? So I think that the way I frame it out in my mind is that they are allowed to have access to God when others aren't, other tribes and stuff like that. And they don't, the ones that are mad about it in the other tribes and stuff, don't want them to be the only ones. So they want access to, and I think that they started off with trying to get access to the underworld, to go down first to get that information from the fallen angels, since they came from heaven, right? But they're not allowed to go back. And so then they start to try to grab these prophets and different groups and like exterminate their families, or, you know, push them out of power so that they don't have an ability to do it without them, because they want God to hear their complaints. They want to be released from the underworld, being thrown into the abyss.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a good part of the Bible that talks about that also. So when you look at like the idea of the multiple temples and the destruction of the temples, right before, a lot of people get kind of concerned about the Talmud, right? The Babylonian Talmud happens after the destruction of the Second Temple, and in 620 BC, and you can read what happened, you know, in 600 BC, just about 20 years before this happens, or is it 620 to 600? 2 Kings 22, and this is in 2 Kings 22. It's often called like the clearing out of the temples, and so some people look at that as like, okay, this is a good thing because there was King Josiah and he was a wise king and he's got these really good religious leaders and they're going to do, you know, everything they can to get rid of the bad priests or something like that. But when you read it, it doesn't really present itself like that. And even if you think about just the fact that as soon as this happened, the temple's destroyed and the tribes are brought into Babylon. So something went wrong and they weren't like really being protected by God after they did this. This is the thing that got God upset. So
yeah.
And this is basically starts out with saying Josiah was 8 years old. So right there, you know something weird, because this wise king is not some wise old man. He's an 8-year-old kid. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you're an 8-year-old king and you have a bunch of priests telling you what to do, instead of you telling the priest what to do, things can get kind of weird, right? And you had also at this time multiple tribes. So it came to pass the 18th year of King Josiah, the king sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, the son of Meshullam, the scribe, to the house of the Lord, and go up to Hilkiah, the high priest, that he may sum up the silver. And he takes the silver under the carpenters, the builders, and the masons to repair the temple. And I think it's down a little bit further here. Concerning the words found, the wrath of the Lord is kindled against us because our fathers have not hearkened unto the words of this book. Okay, so what book are they talking about? They're talking not about like the Tanakh. They're not talking about the Old Testament. They're talking about the law created by the Deuteronomists. So the Deuteronomist law, which says that you can like trade your daughter for shekels, that you can kill a chicken if you sin, like you can run over somebody and you can kill a pig. These are all decided not in the 10 Commandments, not in anything that like Cain and Abel are dealing with. This is something written that are these are Talmudic atonement laws. Like this is the cost for doing the action. If you do something dark, you have to provide God with some sort of payment or repentance. And the question also here is, what do they mean by God? Because the Elohim can refer to Baal and can refer to Moloch and can refer to different characters besides the Tetragrammaton that people think of as, you know, Yahweh, right? Like this thing that's supposed to be this major character. So they go into the temple because they've forsaken me and burned incense unto their other gods. And this is again translated, but lowercase gods, it means like the other Elohim, that they might provoke me to anger with all their works of their hand. Therefore, my wrath shall be kindled against this place, and et cetera, et cetera. It basically says that they were going to burn everything, destroy all the clothes, and then they're going to kill all the priests, and they destroy all the temples except for the one temple. And so at this point in 2 Kings, Josiah's Aaronic tribe of Levi kill all the priests from all the other tribes. So every tribe has their priests, but even weirder, these priests have priestesses. There are priestesses for the tribe of Judah. There are priestesses for the tribe of Reuben. There are priestesses like Kohanats, basically, that are doing different things than killing animals, right? A lot of them are using bread and maize, like the manna from heaven, to make different rice cakes, which is something you see in Eastern religions too. There was a point where animal sacrifice was common in India, right? And if you think about this idea that Noah had several sons after this flood, and they were all descendant from all of this one flood, it kind of makes sense that there's different apostasies or removals from following God's law happening all over the world. It must be at one point that everyone came off the same boat and had the same consensus, but everything goes to hell, like literally and figuratively, after that point. But they even start they get rid of animal sacrifice and start using in the East these bread cakes, kind of like the Eucharist, which represent like this vegetarian tradition that keeps you from causing total murder to everyone around you, right? And that the other thing about this is, because they say that's no longer allowed and they kill all the priestesses and they kill all the other priests, every tribe then cannot ask God for forgiveness on their own. They're not allowed to do it anymore, and they end up having to go to the tribe of Levi. So this is where the tribes, the 12 tribes, 13 tribes, become the kingdom of Judea, of the Jewish kingdom, the house of Israel, and they have one priesthood that's in charge of all of the other tribes. And this has never happened before in history. All of a sudden, there's one group, and this is exactly what they do. They say, you need to pay us shekels. We're going to perform the temple sacrifices. You'll be forgiven. It'll all be our job to take care of it. And this is something that goes on for centuries. It goes on in Babylon. It goes on until they get back to Israel. It goes on when the Roman Empire takes over the land of Judea. It goes on right into Christ's life, when Christ is using a whip and he's telling him to stop doing it, saying that you shouldn't be like taking advantage of these other tribal women, these old ladies that you're taking shekels from so that you can kill a chicken for them. It goes past that 70 years, right? Like 40 more years, really, until the 70 AD temple destruction again. And this is the end of the Jewish tradition for a period of time that the beginning of Christianity starts to emerge. And there's a window there of people who saw it, and they're called witnesses, which is translated as martyr. And anyone who saw what Jesus was doing, they're referred to as the early Christians. They're people that say, hey, actually, we don't have to go to the lawyers. We don't have to go to the temple to have you do sacrifices for us. We can do what Jesus taught us to do and just get right with God on our own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, greatly put. And you know, the whole Esther story and the loss of the temple, right, and her marrying, I believe it was Darius, right, or might have been Xerxes. I think they don't know for sure, but it was lined up with Darius. Is very weird. You know, same thing. They all get run off from there, and then they, you know, whatever, 40 years later, they give it back to Esther and her group. That was the ones that got captured by them, but it looks very, it's like a red flag. Like, why did you guys get captured? The rest of them got killed and ran off, and then you end up marrying her and then allowing her to have the temple back. You know, at any of these points, you know, which has happened multiple times through their history, they could have subverted their own people and took over power because they didn't like who had the power at the time, you know. So
another important thing about that. So how does Jewish matriarchy work? It's a matriarchy. So you pass down from the mother to the daughter, really is like an important aspect of Judaism. How do a lot of Babylonian, Canaanite, other systems work? The patriarchy, right? So let's say you're in Babylon. Let's say that your priestesses or your princesses are married off to the Chaldeans or to high priests, astrologers, people practicing Babylonian magic, and they're married into the Jewish religion because they take the wives. Well, now you have this fusion of the patriarchy of Babylon and the matriarchy of the house of Judah, right? And so this matriarchy that's trying to continue on existing, even in Exodus, even in Babylon, even while they're supposed to be worshiping Moloch and Baal, they're existing in the same family that this group of Babylonian patriarchs are keeping the traditions of Baal worship and Moloch worship. And that goes right on through into Christ's time.
Yeah. And then I know I've mentioned it before, but I'll just mention it again, is that, you know, from what it looks like to me is that there was an area where the fallen angels were thrown into the abyss, right? Different books you can read and stuff like that. People have a different idea of what they think, where it's at physically, and then it's locked in with some sort of magic. But you know, take into consideration that if you look at other stories in different groups, they believe that you know, dragons or these naga, which are associated with the asuras or the demons or whatever, live in the underworld, and that they protect these jewels, gold and you know, different crystals and stuff like that, right? And this kind of goes along with the story of the genie in the lamp and it being underground, and there's all this hidden treasure, and the dragons protecting the treasure, and the leprechauns also, and they live underground in these tree stumps and all this stuff. It's all just like these different mythological stories of this entity that's like a shapeshifter entity that lives in the underworld and protects all the jewels and stuff, and it is basically probably the jewels themselves that they, you know, you rub on the jewel or you rub on the lamp, and you get friction or static energy going, and you release the energy, and that's where they're put into. That's where the abyss is that it's locked into a solid thing that's underground, right, in a way. And so that they're always known to, you know, they're called the Jews, which are jewels and stuff like that. They're looking for power from entities that are locked into the underworld. And I think that, you know, the Temple Mount and all that stuff being where you have to go down layers into it, and they're doing these secret sacrifices and stuff. I think they're trying to figure out how to get these entities out so that they can invoke them and get information from them. And why is it that the Templars, they go to that same place and all this, and they get this information on how to manipulate humanity, on how to create these empires, right? And the Greeks were doing it also. They were using these women that they were getting on psychedelics and stuff like that, and then getting them over certain areas. And these were springs and stuff come up, and they're energy portals, and getting them to
the oracles of Delphi, right?
Yeah, get information from what looks like the underworld, right? And so these empires have always been looking for prophets and seers and channelers and stuff like that, so that they can use them to try to invoke this. So it looks like it's a common thing that they've been doing throughout history, is trying to get information. And I would guess that the Temple Mount may be a place where they believe, at least, or it might have been marked from ancient past, that was the area that some of the major, you know, fallen angels had gone down. And so they're hunting for it. They're looking for it, and they want to try to invoke them to bring up information to control humanity. Because you know, no matter what it was that maybe was the original intent, I think it bred a negative energy and controlled and dominated the individuals that were greedy enough to try to go and invoke these characters. And then, you know, they secretly passed on or whatever, continued to you know, try through their dynasties and stuff like that to continue to go and get more and more information. And I think that you know, this negative energy entities or whatever that were placed underground, let's just say if it's real, you know, the archangels that had to throw, you know, Gabriel, Uriel, Michael, that had to subdue these things and throw them underneath there, wanted them locked away because God, through them, because they're just representations of God, needed them to be bound because they were out of control energies. And so there needed to be at least a certain amount of time, most likely, that they needed to be bound under the ground, and they weren't allowed out. And so they're very powerful, tricky things. So if a human came across a way, figured out that, hey, you know, maybe in the very beginning, these things were getting protected by a class or tribe of Judah or whatever that was protecting that area to make sure, you know, maybe with the Ark of the Covenant or whatever, you know, trying to make sure that it locks it down and they can't get out. And, you know, others that didn't have that power or whatever, out of their jealousy and things like that, wanted to go and try to take that over and have continued to be interacting with these things.
Just one practical example, since you talk about reptilioid figures. There is one underground access site close to Vienna in Klosterneuburg where I've been myself, and there you do have a humanoid hybrid cryptoid hip bone, like the upper part of a leg is the proper way to say it. And nobody would dare to touch it. Only the University of Kazan in currently Tatarstan actually did a scientific analysis, and they kind of confirmed, yes, it's humanoid, but it's not human. And the other things you have, there is statuettes from what we believe to be the Vincha culture, and they actually do look reptilioid. So, and they are pretty deep down. I wouldn't dare to say, is it 500, 5,000 years ago or whatever it is, but it is quite interesting that you do find it. And this excavation has gone on for years now, and there was a lot of rubble to remove. So someone definitely also wanted to seal it, similar as we've been to just recently with the Bosnian pyramids. It was also full of rubble, and people had to slowly dig it out again.
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry.
I was going to quickly say we got a comment in the uncensored chat on F chat. I hope you guys are jumping in there. Jedi asked, was there an equivalent to the Holy Spirit in the OG Christianity? And totally, actually, the Holy Spirit thing goes back to like Genesis, trying to find where I was showing it a second ago. I don't know if I lost it. Genesis 1:2. And this is again from like the Protestant version, but it's like Genesis 1:2. Now the earth was formless and the empty darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. The true translation is like Ruach HaKodesh, which means like the breath of God or the spirit of Elohim. And I think it says like Ruach Elohim, which is the Spirit of God. And a major part of what we're talking about, because in the old days, you had to protect the Spirit of God with the Ark of the Covenant when it wasn't, because you're transporting it to get it to the temple, which is why Solomon built the temple. And the idea of the temple is it's a place where the Spirit of God can really be fully pure, because there's nothing else in there. It's like a vacuumous space that nothing else can be burned or destroyed or corrupted or corrupting the Spirit of God directly. So a major part of the original Christian and actually the old Jewish religion was that you had to have people, because not everyone was willing to do this, live their life as purely as possible and in isolation from sinful life, so they could get deeper and deeper into the temple, and they could be surrounded by and surrounding, to keep safe, the Spirit of God. And in this time, in the old, religious text, there's no question over people's experience with God, because it's never like a weird whisper in your ear. Anytime it's just like God is whispering in your ear, this could just be a demon, because demons are able to whisper in your ear. You needed something that's like a physical, corporeal experience, like this burning bush that tells Moses to take his sandals off because he's entering into a holy place where the Spirit of God can be. They're interacting with physical angels with swords of fire. They're seeing them, they're touching them, they're being touched by them. It's a very physical experience. It's not this sort of, like invisible, like whisper, like this weak thing, like God is weak. And this is something that isn't that God is weak when people are experiencing that. It's that people are weak. They're not living their life in a way that they're able to receive the entire magical experience of being with and in the presence of God. And not only is that happening to your average sinners, but at a certain point, it starts to happen even to the highest priests. The highest priests are no longer living their lives the way that God had originally intended for people to live their lives. And for several generations, it goes by where the priests are not hearing the word of God. And this leads to essentially like Jewish atheism, like the idea that you follow the law, you're supposed to do this thing, but that there's no real God for them to interact with, right? And that's not the way it was originally. It was a far more intimate experience, the connection with God. Like you're supposed to shake the hand of an angel, not just have it whisper in your ear.
Yeah, I would say that they for whatever may have happened, I think that that got cut off because there was too much corruption that had been involved. I think that these things had leaked out, kind of like the ectoplasm out of the Ghostbusters kind of stuff, like the ghosts and the demons and the ghouls and all that stuff have been loosened a long time ago, and that that connection that a certain character and their family and stuff like that were able to stay in the middle and be able to communicate with God, and then go and communicate with also beings in the underworld, that got cut off probably a long time ago, and we're probably only seeing more in the recent 4,000 years or so of them just being able to interact with the underworld, and that is very you can get taken over by them, right? So you have to be very careful to when you go into those realms and interact, that you have to be a penitent man or whatever. You have to be very free of sin, or else you're gonna get corrupted by them. You have to put maybe those shields on that the Aaronic priest did or whatever. I don't know what the details would be, but just kind of following the evidence and looking at it in a general form, I would say that that's probably most likely what we're dealing with, is something that we need the Ghostbusters. We need to call them.
Fair, yeah. Okay, and then really quickly, just because I think we're going to get to the Son of Man stuff in a second, but I wanted to also pop up if you guys haven't already read the book, David Litwa's The Evil Creator, which is a really ominous title, but it talks about this history. It's kind of interesting because you have the story of the way the Jews were interpreting their own God as an angry, jealous God who is wrathful and killed people all the time. And this was something that also was part of early Christianity. If you look at the Marcionites, the Marcionites were some of the early like Pauline Christians, which eventually they kind of stepped back. But you have pre-Pauline Christianity, which is what Christ was doing and the martyrs were doing until Paul shows up after Paul murders a bunch of early Christians, right? Because Paul was Saul and he was kind of an administrator for Roman Judaism and Hellenic Judaism. And he, we have the Corinthian letter, we have the Apostles of Thessalonica. The Bible's filled with books from Paul today. It wasn't like that originally. It wasn't like that before Paul. And even during Paul's life, a lot of the apostles who knew Jesus didn't like Paul, not only because he killed Christians originally before he saw the light on the road to Damascus, and God said, "I'm the one you're persecuting," etc. But
yeah, sounds like a liar.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we could say about Paul. I know that upsets people, but we can go into that. Just the point is that Pauline Christianity takes off really after the death of Paul during Nero in Rome. And when that happens, a number of Christian groups start to really push Pauline Christianity. And the reason Pauline Christianity is the most common today is probably because of Marcion, right? Marcion was, let me see if I can go to a wiki to show you just like the most basic thing you can get. Marcion, how about that? Like Marcion of Sinope. I'll just have just a picture. Will that help? Marcion was the first one to invent the idea of a canon, right? So he how the Star Wars canon exists, or how we think of there's certain Septuagint works that are biblical works we think of as important. He was the first one to suggest this. Eventually they said, you know what, he's crazy. We need to have our own canon. But that was only in a response to Marcion. And Marcion thought we need to be very careful about the differences between old Judaism and new Jesus. Paul was talking about it. We need to reject and abandon everything that the Jews were doing before Jesus, because he didn't really see the nuance that there were different Jewish groups that had been oppressed and murdered during the Second Kings period. He basically thought, well, there's really just the tribe of Levi, right? And they're just all in charge. And that's all that's going on. And they're talking about this angry, jealous God. And if I read the Tanakh, I read the Old Testament, I can see that the angry, jealous God is very different from the Jesus loves you God. So let's throw away all the Old Testament. That was Marcion's idea. We'll get rid of the whole Old Testament. We'll just have a few of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we'll have all of Paul's letters, and then we're going to build a new religion based on sacrificing Jesus. Because, even though God didn't kill Jesus, like it wasn't like Jesus got hit with a lightning rod, there's this whole idea that it was this greatest thing that God ever did to have humans murder Jesus. Like somehow by proxy, God meant for Jesus to die. It was all part of the plan for Jesus to die. He knew what he was getting into. It's kind of this weird thing. Like, what was Jesus wearing? Obviously he wanted it. It's scary to me that became Christianity, but that's basically the beginning, is Marcion's idea. And Marcion takes what, originally was this idea that there was an angry, jealous, evil kind of creator that was this sort of, and this is what the Gnostics continued to understand as God, that there was a dark side to the Elohim, this plural head that has multiple family members, and that the loving son is a new deity, like a new replacement for the angry, jealous God, right? And eventually what they did in the 3rd century is just completely get rid of the angry, jealous God. There never was an angry, jealous God. There never was an aspect of God like El Shaddai, which means like the destroyer. It's all misinterpretation. And really, God has always loved you. He was just waiting for Jesus to be born to really show you that for some reason. And that becomes modern Christianity, but it's a complete rejection of the original way that it was looked at. That, in the old days, there was a family of God. the Elohim are talking to each other. Jesus talks to his Father. He's not just talking to himself. In Babylon, with the Tower of Babel, the Elohim is talking to Elohim. Like some of the gods are talking to the other gods. And they're saying, we need to go down and confuse man because soon they will be like us. There's a lot of very weird schizophrenic stuff for a single person to be doing if it's just that God is a single person. But they just erase all of this because we're moving into Hellenic periods, right? Neoplatonic periods. And this also relates to what Giant was just saying about the underground, because we talked about Babylon. Now we've mentioned the Jews in Egypt to a little extent. We didn't go too big into Akhenaten and Amarna and Otanism or anything. But when the Jews go to the Hellenic Greek philosophical schooling and start learning that, it changes everything about the way the Jews are thinking at that point as well. They're thinking of Abraham in the cave when he's waiting to go home and crush the idols as not just Abraham in a cave. It becomes Abraham in Plato's cave. And then he starts to see things like the removal of shape and form because they're not seeing the actual apparitions of God anymore. So for them, there is no apparition of God. So you shouldn't have one either. And you need to erase the idols. It's not that the idols are what they used to be. An idol used to represent is something you worship outside of the source of things. Instead of an icon, right? An icon, which the Greek Orthodox will use, isn't something you idolize. It's a depiction of a thing that happened. By the time that people are thinking that destroying icons of God are destroying idols, we're basically at Sharia. You know, that's like where the Muslims don't let you take a photo of your family anymore. Is that an idol? Not actually, right? But this is the beginning, because where do the Greeks get their ideas? They don't come from the same school of a loving God. They actually come from a much more similar idea of this destructive God. And they believe in Prometheanism, in Titans. These ancient Greeks are talking about Titans that are the primordial Platonic concepts that get trapped underground, like Giant was saying, by these created gods created by the Titans, right? And then the Titans then create man in order to conquer the gods and protect either the Titans or to protect the gods. And this becomes two schools of thought. Eventually the Greeks merge with Hellenic Prometheanism, and the Christians take one school, which is the protection of the gods, and the Jews take the other school, which is the liberation of the Titans.
Yeah, and interesting how Godzilla's a Titan, right?
Totally, right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a lizard being.
Yeah, giant dragon, right? So it permeates through all the cultures. It's all interlinked and stuff. If we pay attention to even our movies and our music and all that stuff, is that the same lineage of people are still in control and showing us this stuff. And I probably don't take the same angle on it as most people and just, it's all just completely evil and that's it, it's just black and white. I take more of a thought process and an approach on it as that God is both things. God is up and God is down. God is left and God is right. God is all things. It's more like the Abraxas, right? And that you don't want to become a victim of, or the fool, or the betrayer or anything, and take the wrong side of the coin. Someone's got to play all the parts, and so you are supposed to do your duty in this world, like the Hindus would say, like Vishnu mentions, is play your part, do your duty, whatever it may be. You have to play it out because there's a reason behind all the interactions and the conflicts and all that stuff. But if you know that you are a good soul and you're supposed to bring goodness to this world and try to help heaven on earth, then you definitely should not allow yourself to be tricked by the other side. You should know what the other side is and still have compassion and love. I think that's what Jesus was trying to get across, is like, you got to understand that this world is all just God. We're all the same thing. Like, I'm the son of God, you're the son of God, you're the daughter of God. We're all children of the same entity that is everything. And that includes those fallen angels. And that, a way of seeing, maybe the main deity, this Lucifer, which is where you get the name like Lucy and stuff. It's very feminine. Is the, it probably got switched to a masculine form at some point. And the angels are always intermixed between being masculine and feminine. It just depends on how they wanted to represent them. Like Uriel is kind of a girl and kind of a boy, just depending on the situation. They all have long hair. Jesus is represented in a lot of Christians see him as with the long hair and stuff like that, but not always. I know that it just depends on if it's the Mormon Jesus or the Jehovah's Witness Jesus, that's short hair. But I believe it's just all symbology to show you that it was a character that is birthed from a female and doesn't have a male, right? Supposedly God inseminated or whatever, but there's no male gene. And so it's kind of like a masculine, feminine sort of thing.
Right.
And
Which makes
it
son
is
of
sort
man kind of a weird thing to say, son of man, right?
Yeah, it is kind of hermaphroditic, but it's symbolically hermaphroditic. It's not like it's saying that it's okay to be, not what you're meant to be in this world, right?
But it's a
Like
weird
God,
inversion. Like even from the Old Testament, we have different versions of the Old Testament, which people were killed for, right? For like centuries, they were killing people that had the Apocrypha, the Apocalypse of Adam, I think is one that talks about this. But generally, the version that most people have is that Adam comes first. They skip Lilith because it's just a man is created, breath comes into, the holy breath is breathed into this mud and clay, and then out of the man comes the daughter, which is just, I mean, it's interesting. But in your most recent understanding of biology and of women giving birth, like how often does it happen that way, and how often does it happen the other way? Like the woman coming first, and then the child comes from the body of inside the woman. So there is this interesting inversion. Either that's completely expected and that's just the way it's always been, or again, maybe some of these other versions of the story where there's a feminine birthing process, that Adam is born out of Lilith or with Lilith, and that the woman is, actually the first creation. This is something that really upsets people starting when? So the best we understand is again like 600 BC. So because you have the idea of pseudo Isaiah. Also, there's the book of hold on, let me show you one of the most important books in the Bible, because Isaiah is something that Jesus even said, study Isaiah. It was one of the major things that Jesus wanted people to study. And looking at Isaiah, there's 3 or 4 different voices in the translation from different centuries. There's 600 BC, 200 BC as well, and like maybe 400. So spread out centuries from each other. And we have one version of Isaiah at this point, but it's actually multiple pieces that are sewn together from different centuries that are describing something that happens after the male priests take over and there's no more allowance of female priestesses.
Yeah, they're trying to take out the feminine from the very get-go, because the word or the wisdom is Sophia, right, in the beginning. And if you look at it just like as a symbol or an archetype or whatever, it's called Mother Earth, right? And it's obviously something, Earth is something that births stuff, so it would be a feminine character. Well, the sun, there's your masculine, right? And so it's easy to understand it in that, not that that's all that it means. Like some people just think, oh, it's just all astrology or, astronomy and looking at the spheres or whatever, the cosmos, and they're only talking about that. I think that's just, it's just one of those things. It's so above, so below. You can you can see anything that happens in nature, whether the cycling of stuff or whatever, it applies across the board, and you're supposed to know it in all the levels, in at least 33 different ways, right? Or more, just depending. 365 ways, if you're talking about every day or every moment that you can etch out of a circle, or 360, I should say. But with our days, 365. But it's just so that you know, and then also think of it as in a sphere, and then all those different little angles go in the different ways. Like we're supposed to understand things on so many levels. It takes obviously lifetimes to do that, and so we pass down the information to each other and history and stuff like that, and a lot gets lost in the sauce. But this place birthed us from nothing, right? No real counterpart that's here. It's away, and that's your God. That's the sun. That's one way of framing it, of looking at it, right? And so this story coming up is representing that, where it's this female that in the Greeks and all that stuff, right? There's always these females that get inseminated by Zeus or whatever, and they have a child, and it's this hero character, right? So what I feel like they're trying to show you, whether those characters actually existed in real life or not, and whether they were truly the hero character and all that stuff. Some of them did do big things, and we can track them down, like Alexander, supposedly really existed. Who knows? They've changed up history so much. Like, I don't want to argue that to the core, but one of the stories behind him is that he's a hero, that he's a part God, right, and all that stuff. So that's kind of this. Sometimes they're called the great creators, or the Son of Man, or they're heroes. And what are the etymologies behind that, of hero being connected to a hybrid, and the word like giant and stuff like that, it is this hybrid creature. That's why I use that moniker giant, is that it's the A is capitalized too, that it's an ant also, so it's like a hybrid between the two. It kind of goes into that sort of thought process.
Bring this up right now, and it may fit here. So of course I would be amiss, and maybe it's because I spoke too much with David Ewing Jr. and looked too much at the work of Fomenko, who, as you know, calls all of modern Western history into question. The one idea I really like, of course I can't say equally whether it's true or not, but that in the lineage of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, they are, for lack of a better term, I wrote it down right here, basically egalitarian revolutionary politicians. And that they actually all, and also could be called hybrids, not to say bastards, but in a sense that it may well be that they were both part of the downtrodden and part of the elite at the same time, and actually assisted humans in evolving and actually having access to language, culture, and all of these things we take for granted today. And in that sense, they certainly would be true heroes in a historical sense as well, if they are real figures. But this would also, of course, make all of them a prime target to obfuscate these heroic actions which they may have performed, and now make them, into blood-called idol worship. Each one of them, I guess especially Jesus and Muhammad, have their own dark side that may, to a large extent, be created to obfuscate the true progress with which they may have assisted humanity at large. So they are definitely prime targets for capture in that sense, narrative capture, let's say.
Yeah, and then something that I mention to people too is, if you look at the Mediterranean and the Middle East and everything, this is like the prime center of all these stories and all the stuff that's going on. And if you were to think about it, those kids are basically a mixture between the children of the South and the children of the North. They're a mixed breed. Right. And so this is probably why, at least the original Jews, probably looked more, mixed, darker hair, curly hair, stuff like that. We're saying that they're the chosen ones, and they probably were at that time. They probably got some sort of message from something or whatever that, hey, this is what we're aiming for. We're aiming for something in the middle, a balance point, because that's what it seems like this world is trying to do, is it's trying to find balance. It's trying to find equilibrium and stuff like that. And so they were of the time a representation of that, right? And so were the Persians, so were the Egyptians, right? They were all like mixed kids, right? And so there, again, you kind of have this hybrid, mixture sort of thing. And that's something just to take into consideration, that you continue, it's either God with human or different humans from the north and the south coming together. And then you get these mixed kids. And this is where all the action is happening with all these stories and stuff, is all in this basically the center, this media, right? It used to be called media, the Middle East, right? And
Medea, right?
Yeah, media.
Mediterranean, medicine,
Mediterranean, yeah,
all of these words.
And you medicine, you mix it down, right? The medicine Buddha is trying to take all the different factors of this world and mix it together and come up with this ultimate antidote to the situation. And if you see that, if the children of this world ended up just all mixing together and everything like that, in a sense, that would be an antidote within itself, because they would not have allegiance to any one type of nation or people. They would be everything. They would be the son of man, that what man would end up wanting to eventually become, the child, in a way. Like it said son, but it's like, let's just think of it as the children or the child of mankind, but also the son of God or the children of God, right? And we all are still, separated, but it seems like this world is, wanting the humans, at least, and the characters on it, to go and spread out and adapt to different areas and then come back together. And why is America called the mixing pot? Why have the Americas become such another, like, and then we have Mediterranean climate here in the middle of America, right, running right through the middle of it and everything.
This one really upsets people for sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of finish that up, is that it just seems like if you're looking at it with those kind of eyes, you can see that, even these secret societies and stuff know that, and they create these titles and stuff, and they're looking for the next place to make the melting pot and this mixing pot, and there's going to cause conflict, and there's going to be all this stuff. And if we just kind of understand it on that bigger level, you can kind of see what God or Mother Nature or existence, reality is doing, is it's trying to come to that final antidote, right? And it happens to just, everything has to go through conflict to get mixed down, right? Even the old Greek stories and the Hindus and all that stuff, they're talking about these primordial or in chaos.
But in some mixing, it's reduction. Sometimes it's actually like a loss of it. Like, for instance, using the word God to describe the Elohim is a major reduction. I mean, and we should answer. I'm going to answer because I see we have a super chat from Sparrow, a good sizable one. Thank you, Sparrow. Where is the Trinity in the Bible? So weird. This is the most common form of Christianity. Agreed. And I hate how it upsets people when I debunk the Trinity. They don't like that, but we'll do that in just a second. Let me just start with what you just said, Giant, because Jesus said it. It's actually, Jesus answered them, John 10:34. Is it not written in your law? I said, ye are gods, right? And this is because it says this earlier. I know this is going to upset so many people. Psalms 82:6. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are the children of the Most High, right? Which is the Ben Adam, right? And the Ben Adam or the Ben Adonai. So the children of the Adonai, of the Elohim, Ben Elohim. So it is in there directly, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament. Jesus says it himself, that ye are not only the Spirit of God, not only the sons of God, but ye are actually the Elohim, like the children of the Elohim. You are the children of the Most High. You are an extension of God. It's hard for people to handle that because it's different than saying you're the source. It doesn't mean you're like the thing that created the gods, but people don't like to think about the thing that the thing you're worshiping is one step higher than you're skipping a step. Because sure, we know angels and we know man, but there are gods. It says so in the 10 Commandments, have no other gods before me. because I am above all things. There's a thing that's above all things, which is the thing you're talking about when you're just talking about the little gods. There's a bigger thing. That is your God. That is your Father. That is exactly what you're getting at. So, that's, I think, important for people to understand. That's different than the Adonai Elohim or El Elyon, the highest of all highs. That there are still things created that are gods that are above the angels, the Adonai Elohim, and that humans are actually more powerful than the Adonai Elohim, higher than the angels in a sense, even though we have mortality, because we have the potential to be gods under the Most High. And this, I think, is also going to bother people because it connects to why Trinitarianism exists. Although Trinitarianism is not in the Bible, Trinitarianism is directly responsible for Lucifer, because Lucifer is not in the Bible either. Lucifer is added years later. And we kind of talked about this just a second ago, Sparrow, about the Johannine comma, but the Johannine comma is from the 14th century. It doesn't appear in any text until at least after Islam has existed for centuries.
1 second.
Sure, for sure. I'll just really quickly go through this thing. For there are three that bear the record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. This is something added to the King James Bible in the 14th to the 16th century. The King James is 16, but it actually comes from a 14th century manuscript. But that's not from any of the old original versions of the Epistle of John. In the original Epistle of John, it doesn't talk about three at all. It talks about the blood and the water and Christ. It talks about baptism, and the translation's completely different. It's a completely new translation that's been added later. So there's no Trinity. There's no evidence of a Trinity. The Trinity is created far later. Even J. Doe, he wants to talk about the golden ratio, talking about the Trinity. I mean, I can see how you're mapping onto Hellenic concepts a Trinity, but this shows you again that what you're showing is, the Fibonacci sequence. This is mathematics, and it's going on to 1, 2, 3, 5. It's actually even a bigger thing if you follow the sequence. It's talking about the divine council, right? And so the divine council at one point is very clear in Psalms, in the Old Testament. There's a lot of evidence of different beings that are part of, so there's the gods, but then there's the aspects of God. So we call that hypostasis. Hypostasis is the word that the Greeks use to describe different substances or different pieces of God. And so there's a lot more than three. There's way more than three parts of the Elohim, right? We think of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and those are indeed aspects of hypostasis, but these are Neoplatonic concepts that come from the older idea where there's also El Shaddai, and there's El Elyon, and there's Asherah, and there's Sophia, and there's Chokhmah, and there's a lot more pieces than just three, but all of them get reduced at a certain point because they can't handle the idea that there's so many aspects of God. The Orthodox, the Christian Orthodox, they do accept to an extent that there are other aspects. They don't really refer to them as aspects, though. They look at the Trinity and say, well, there is one thing that's like the higher point, which is God, and the Holy Spirit and Christ are subservient to the higher point of the Trinity, which is leading you to that point of understanding that there's something greater. But these aspects of God, they extend. There's like 613 of them. There's so many different aspects. And the Greek Orthodox will just refer to them as names of God, right? But they're not just names. It's not that we're calling God, El Elyon, El Shaddai on a Thursday. That's not how that works. There's a moment where the Elohim send the hypostasis of the El Elyon, El Shaddai, which is the destroyer. And that is acting an aspect of God. And this is different than angels, right? In angels, when we talk about Lucifer, it's interesting because we look at Isaiah, which is talking about the morning star. And in the Erasmus translation, we have phosphore, right, which refers to Venus, and it's translated as Lucifer. And this happens in like the 4th or 5th century. I think it's 395 to 400. They start using the word Lucifer, and it comes from a specific guy. It comes from a Trinitarian minister who was considered to be a heretic, right? Because at the time not everyone was a Trinitarian. There were Trinitarians, and then there was even the school of St. Arius. And St. Arius really offended the Trinitarians. There's pictures of St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, beating him. He was drugged. He was poisoned. St. Arius was murdered. He ends up, his bowels empty. There's paintings of him dying, and Christian Trinitarians celebrate the death of St. Arius, right? But they don't like to talk about Lucifer. But Cagliari, Lucifer of Cagliari, there's still a temple there where there's a church where they worship still, and they venerate their Saint Lucifer. And Lucifer was a Trinitarian. He was very pro-Trinitarian, and he was very anti-St. Arius. And there were a lot of people that were against St. Lucifer, right? And so I think even Augustine, and there's different texts during the Paulinist point. Jerome talks about it as well, that he was excommunicated perhaps in the, hinted in the writings of Ambrose of Milan and Augustine of Hippo, talking that this guy, sure, he was maybe a good Trinitarian, which is eventually the thing that becomes super popular. By the 4th century, you have the Nicene Creed, but it wasn't acceptable at that time. And so they looked at him like an overzealot member of the church who took it into his own hands to force people to believe things that they didn't want to believe. And this is not to say that Satan doesn't exist in the Bible. Like, there's the serpent. The serpent isn't described as Satan. It's described as the most cunning beast of the field. But there is Samael. Let me see if I can find you Samael, which is one of the angels of death that works for God. And a lot of these stories end up being transmuted or reduced into a single being, which we call the accuser, Satan. And then that is labeled Lucifer. But Lucifer doesn't really show up in the Bible at all, not the name Lucifer, except for in Erasmus's mistranslation in Isaiah, in Pseudo-Isaiah, of Phosphore. So again, talking about Venus, the morning star. So there's really the character of Lucifer as a creation, and it's interesting where it comes from, because it has nothing to do with the beliefs of the Jews or of the Christians. Even though Samael is a real character, even though there is the accuser, even in Revelations they talk about the accuser, the mixture to make Lucifer really comes from a political place, not from a religious place.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, yeah, and then it's very symbolic too. Like, there's always there's always a 1,000 ways, I would say, to look at all these different things, but there's obviously everything kind of goes up in a pyramid, and there's things that are more important ways of looking at the information. But the fact that it's associated with this Venus character is, has its astronomical connection as well, and where the story that is applied to the planet and the influence that planet brings, and all the stories that are involved with the astrology, whether it be Western or Vedic astrology, it all intersects into the story, and there's something to be read out of it, right? And there's reasons why the megaliths and the stone carvers and all that stuff have embedded the same story in their own way, and their symbology and everything into the stones and into the history that ended up being written down about astrology. And why is it that these different astrological features and planets are associated with those time periods, and where the sun is at, and with the equinox and the solstices and all this stuff? It all plays into that, right? So this Venus character, again, I would try to frame it out as this, there's a female entity or an opposition to God. And if God is the sun and is the light bringer, and it's shooting out from it and everything, kind of like the rays, or that phallic sort of symbol. It's a spear, it's a sword, it's a ray going outward. And then the earth is this feminine thing that's receiving that, right? Receiving that phallic symbol or, you know, cosmic jizz or whatever you want to call it, to impregnate it, then of course they're going to embed this into the stories of not only the religions, but the, you know, astrological information, mythologies, and all that stuff. So you'll find it everywhere. And so I think it's best to understand it with that bigger point of view, that kind of, you know, bigger look at it all, that, you know, the reason they're introducing this character might be for different reasons at different times, and why they want to make it out as demonic is obviously there's an element of it is that they're trying to hide the sacred feminine, or they're trying to put it down, or don't want people to understand it. I think that there's good and bad guys that are involved in symbolically hiding this information. I think that, you know, this dominant energy that's supposed to go in and subvert things and everything has figured out a way to get it even to the secret societies. And those are probably taken over in most aspects, just like everything else, like our governments are and all that stuff. But I don't think that they completely understand the higher logic of God, and how God hid his ultimate way of getting this story to play out the way that it wants to play out. And so it's we know enough of it, we can see enough of the symbology and stuff through all these different ways to say that these groups highly believe in that there is this characteristic of this ultimate female thing that will give birth to this male son, child, hero, or, you know, in different ways of thinking about it, just the future of humanity. It will get to a point, and I think, you know, hopefully we're close enough to being there, or we're there, that there's this son of man character that'll come, or this Superman, right? And Superman's related to it. I you know, Stan Lee, or was it Stan Lee that made Superman? I don't, or no, it was someone else. But these comic book writers, they definitely know a lot of this mythology, and are pretty in depth.
Siegel.
Yeah, so they have, I would say, connections to the same people that are involved with the music industry, movie industry, all this stuff, where, you know, they're educated enough to know. And over time, a lot of people get involved too, in applying more and more detail to these characters and sussing them out. And that's just, I think, a human feature. I think it's locked in all of us anyways, and we are performers for this God, and we can channel, and I think our artists are just channelers that are bringing this out and sussing it out, and showing each other, we're telling each other the story that God wants us to hear over time, whatever way of thinking about it that you want. But Superman represents a symbolic thing within all of us, or we wouldn't have harmonized and made him such a big character in all of our minds and everything. You know, it's not just
Superman is the potential of, like, any, like, so if you think about what people really define gods as, they're really just talking about Superman. A lot of people don't really see the greater thing that's beyond the Superman. The Superman is just this super capable version of yourself. It's a man without limits, transhumanism. But that's not God, right? That's the issue that people have. And also the feminine aspect of God is so, you know, I like that you're saying it's expanded on, but it's also really reduced and removed, right? Because when you go and you look at the Old Testament, and you look at, I mean, for instance, Solomon prays to a star. The star is Venus, right? And he makes a wish on the wishing star. And you can wish for anything. What does Solomon wish for? He wishes for wisdom, right? But what is wisdom translated as? Wisdom is chokmah, right? Which in Greek is Sophia. Sophia is the aspect of God that is wisdom itself and feminine. And this goes, this is why, well, when this is exactly why philosophia, philosophy, phila means love of, Sophia means love of her who is wisdom. And in the Bible, like Sophia in Proverbs, because when Solomon asks for wisdom, he's not just asking for ideas, he's asking literally for the wife of God to give him information. He ends up in a relationship with Sophia. This is very much what the Epic of Gilgamesh talks about with Isis, this idea that Isis is actually giving wisdom directly. And in Proverbs, like for instance, Proverbs 8, like wisdom speaks for herself. Sophia speaks for herself. She says, I was with God before the beginning. I was with God during the creation. I will be with God during, the birthing of the Emmanuel. All of these things are not just wisdom saying it. It's that wisdom that she herself, the wife of God, which is exactly what Abraham knew. All of the ancient Jews knew this, that the Elohim were a family. This is what the menorah for Hanukkah represents. It's the family tree. The family tree is the matriarchy. It's the wife of God, otherwise referred to as Asherah, right? Asherah, these are originally before they smashed all the idols, all the icons. This was the wife of God, right? And the wife of God was very well understood by not only the ancient people, not only the ancient Jews, even the Babylonians, because the Jews were there with them. Christ knew about wisdom. Christ knew about Sophia. This ended up being a major thing people were killed over, knowing about the wife of God, Pistis Sophia, Sophia of Christ, right? The feminine aspect of God that is wisdom. This is what Gnosticism shouldn't be referred to as Gnosticism, because Gnosis might have to do with knowledge, but it's knowledge of her who is wisdom, knowledge of the wife of God. And this is something that's completely erased, essentially taken away from our understanding of the modern, that God would have a wife. And this, it's interesting that Christians don't like this so much, of God having a wife to them. Well, that's like for a Muslim thinking that Allah has a wife. Again, a lot of Christian ideas come from Islam. They don't realize it, but they don't know what it's like for God to have a wife. It's unfathomable to a group of people that have priests that aren't allowed to marry. So there's just no way for them to deal with this, that there is a feminine aspect of God and that wisdom is so important to it. The fetish of happiness, right? Okay, and I just wanted to also clarify something I said earlier, because we talked about where in the Bible does the Trinity come from, and I told you that the Trinity doesn't come from the Bible, but really I said it comes from Neoplatonism. I should be a little bit more specific. Like where Trinity comes from is from Greek, and so it really comes from Plotinus. And Plotinus wrote something called the classical fusion, and he referred to this idea of the one, the soul, and the nature, right? So there's this idea of the metaphysical map, right? And the metaphysical map has to do with your place in the Trinity. And so the one, the soul, and the nature, this is really the beginnings of the concepts of the Trinity. And early Christians were so sure that we had to marry ourselves into Greek thought that they were trying to figure out, okay, well, the Greeks must understand this metaphysical reality better than us. How can we describe Christianity through a Greek lens? And we took Plotinus's metaphysical map and we created the Trinity, something that was not Jewish, something that was not biblical, something that was not Christ oriented. How can we make Christianity into, and this is, the beginning of that whole idea that there would be a three-part instead of a more spectrum to the Elohim.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the whole three thing, it's going to fit into a lot of different aspects that are just facts of nature. First there's one, then there's two, then there's three. It's the father, the mother, and then the child, whatever the child may be, female or male.
But really there's four usually, because there's the Holy Spirit, which is like the whole family unit. There's something that transcends from generation, from father to son, from father and mother to son. There's shared breath, right? The breath that's breathed into the father and mother is breathed into the child. So there's at least the quaternity process. Some Catholics have tried to work with the quaternity process, but people need to be willing to look at these things from way higher dimensional thought. Three is just a really simple thing to work with.
Yeah, I mean, it would just unfold whatever, is happening during the creation would unfold as one first, then two, then three, then four. I mean, it probably the breakdown between the three and the four probably happened really fast because the two would just split into another two, right? And then there's the fifth, right? Like Brahma is shown with four faces, but there's actually a face that's on top. You had one that was looking back up to God, and that ends up getting cut off and thrown into the Milky Way. Basically, if you look at the stories of what's told about that, it looks like it was sent into the Milky Way area, but they don't really show that fifth one. But you know, there's so many meanings and there's so many stories associated. You have to read all these stories and then start, you know, discerning out, oh yeah, like in one way they're just saying that this is how things divide, and started breaking down, you know, and you get all the numbers and all that stuff. And you know, Brahma was trying to figure out, you know, I've said this on here before, is that the story that Brahma was created and he was put into, and he came up, you know, the lotus, and he was sitting on top of it. It's Vishnu dreaming into this world, which is Aditi, right? And then her children out of that are the Adityas, or they're like sun gods, right? And they're split into 12 for all the 12 different major angles of influence from the sun going around it or whatever. But Brahma is just first sent into the dream. He's the first character created by Vishnu into the dream, and he has to figure out what is it that he's in, because, you know, let's just take it that Vishnu's never been here before. He's never dreamed into this realm before. And so, or he doesn't give Brahma the information from last time because he wants it to be fresh and start over again, start the program again, and see what can be deduced by this place, what can be figured out. And he only slightly communicates with Brahma and lets him know, like, hey, just, you know, just relax, like breathe, like, because Brahma's, you know, kind of tripping out, or like, what is this? What am I doing here? Like confused. And he, like, you know, is able to somewhat communicate with himself, you know, as Vishnu, because everything is Vishnu technically, right? He's just the first character. And then, you know, he figures out, as you read through the story, he's figuring out that, oh, okay, first I got to break myself into two, and then, you know, 3, 4. And then he starts dividing himself, and then he creates these chaos characters out of the nothing. He starts creating these characters, and kind of what you can deduce through it is, like, he's trying to figure out how to create these characters, but he's also getting it from the space that he's in. And so it is Sophia's wisdom that he's really tapping into. He's like almost like meditating into it, because maybe even Vishnu doesn't know. Like, he's putting Brahma in almost like this phallic thing, and, you know, together they have to make the world into something from nothing, right? And so, yeah, it's just it's, you know, you can gather from the story that he's figuring out how to make the world out of nothing. And in the only thing he has to interact with is he has a space to do it, and somehow he's able to create matter and you know, create different archetypes that he's like starts like throwing them against each other, like, you know, they're polar opposite, and then he starts throwing them against each other, and then the children of that are mixtures in different ways, right? And that's why even the Greeks, they talk about it, and, you know, it's like you have the child of darkness is like night and dreams, and, you know, all these different things that would come from that same kind of concept, but in different like mixtures of it with the other god that it, you know, got impregnated by or whatever, right? So yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say on that part, is the, you know, I think of like the numbers, and, you know, anything like a trinity or whatever is trying to explain a lot, but in basic, it's just that everything has to unfold in a certain order, you know?
Yeah, and that's so also fair to say that I think Eastern Asian religions, like the Trimurti in the Brahmin, because a lot of people don't get that. They think that, you know, a lot of people will say that Christianity is monotheistic or Judaism is monotheistic, which it's clearly not. If you read the 10 Commandments and you read the Bible and you see that other gods are mentioned, and they're not just, you know, false idols. They're literally described as gods that you're not supposed to worship and you're supposed to be careful of. But also that they say that Hinduism, which is also a weird way to describe Sanatana Dharma or these different Vedic beliefs, they describe the generality of Hinduism as polytheistic, which it's not either, because actually, if anything, that Hinduism is a far more monotheistic belief. If you think about how the Catholic Church has tons of, and the Orthodox have tons of saints that get worshipped by different groups. If you conquer a bunch of places that have different gods and you turn some of them into, because this happened, there are a lot of these different locations where people worshipped, like St. Christopher, I think, is based on the River of Styx deity for the Celts. And there's a number of examples of this where, you know, they've actually just taken local pagan beliefs and turned them into saints that you can worship still and put on your dashboard. When you, there's a patron saint of golf carts, there's a patron saint of garage sales, there's a patron saint of going sailing on Thursday, right? This is because you've got people that were polytheistic in Rome, right? And you can take those religious ideas, and even if you're supposed to have one God, you can still have a bunch of polytheistic beliefs in that religion. And that's what happened in India. You have the Trimurti, which is really, there's one God that has multiple aspects, and we're talking about at least the three aspects of creation, existence, and destruction in the Trimurti. And these ideas make their way east through Manichaeism from Persia and Zoroastrianists into the Manichaeans. And the Manichaeans were interested in Buddhism and Christianity, and they were kind of the way the West fused the Middle East. Manichaeism was the East fusing with the Middle East. And while we don't have any Manichaeans left anymore, because Augustine wasn't super impressed with them, I guess, or he didn't like them for some reason, maybe because his dad was a pantheist. They believed in kind of a Zoroastrian thing where there was 7 light and 7 dark that were merged together. The Manichaeans brought with them ideas to the Middle East and into the Greek schools from Persia. And this is where a lot of ideas, like the Eastern ideas, like the Hindu ideas through Buddhism to Hinduism of the Trimurti were brought. So there's a lot of other places besides Jesus that the Trinity comes from. It just doesn't, it comes from everywhere, just not from Jesus. It comes, basically everyone else but Jesus believed in this whole, they didn't all believe in it, but that's the whole rest of the world. You can look anywhere else you want, and you might find something about that Trinity. You just won't find it ever. You won't ever find it from Jesus, right? That's kind of the irony of the Trinity. But you will find Pistis Sophia. You will find wisdom. You will find the feminine aspects that Christ is talking about, the feminine aspects of God. You will see that going back through Abraham, from Solomon. You will see that the feminine aspect of God is something that's constantly being talked about as one of the most important things to revere, to not blaspheme, to not take into, use in vain, and that this is where wisdom comes from, but also where discord comes from, because there's both the chaotic aspect and the balanced and wise aspect of the feminine. So you have Eris and you have Sophia, right? So Eris being sort of chaos and discord, and then Sophia being wisdom and balance and justice. And these things are very mixed. Even Solomon talks about this. Like, at some point, it's very hard to tell the difference between tearing the baby in half and letting the right mother have her child back. So law itself might, in a material form, try to be an effigy, worshiping and following the way of wisdom of Sophia. And often it won't. Often it will be that law is looking like it's doing wise things, but it's actually emulating Eris and chaos.
Yeah. There are other aspects of the female, right? There in all the cultures, there's many aspects of this sacred feminine, where, she's involved with as much death as she is involved with life. And just like Shiva and Kali and all that, is that they take on different forms to play out different roles, because in this world, if you don't have things that die, then they could, get out of control. There's no limits to their power, and they actually would interfere with life, because you don't even need life and birth if there is no death, right? So they get involved in both sides of things, and then they're called different things depending on who's the victim of that scenario at the time. Even murderers and criminals don't like being punished, but it doesn't mean that they don't need to be. And we all want to live to forever, but we probably do live forever, but we have to get rebirth. And so I think we just don't understand the more cruel or painful parts of how it represents itself. But I think that they're all technically, just like all the different masculine forms of God, whether it be the devil or whatever, is not our favorite view of them. It's still an aspect of God. And then there's the female side, which she has her own, sisters or, ways of showing herself at different times to different people that seem very cruel and Satan-like or whatever. There's a Pluto and his wife goddess in the underworld, and I'm sure Satan has his own wife underneath there and everything too. So you're going to have all these different feminine and masculine characters. A lot of the stories you see where there's this hero character that has to go under and save someone, Demeter and her daughter, and her daughter, needed Orpheus to go down. I believe I'm probably mixing up the stories, but there's always a character that has to go down that's of the opposite sex to go and save.
Persephone with Hades, right? So
or
into the Tartarus, and there's different version of that, but the one I like is that Persephone's super into, she's like into tall, dark, and handsome. She's a goth girl. Persephone's kind of into that, and she's tired of having spring all the time, and she doesn't even want to go home and work, but she has to. She has to go home and work so that she can go back to her husband that she loves, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's these nakshatras that talk about the same thing, and it's related to the moon. There's a moon god, and it's all of his daughters, the different, the moons across the whole cycle, and how the gods only wanted to mate with just the one daughter. And so it shows that there wouldn't have been movement, there wouldn't have been seasons and stuff if that moon stayed in the orbit that it was at and only was a spring moon, and that's all everybody wanted to mate with, and there wouldn't be cycles, and this whole thing wouldn't have happened. If you don't have the cycles, you don't have the seasons, you don't have the ups, the downs, you don't have reality. And so to make sure that happened, it's a very similar thing where you get the sense in general that they're saying, okay, we have to not allow her to either stay in one place. The other sisters need to have sex with some of the gods, whatever. They put it in a kind of a different way, but across the board, you'll see that it kind of is pointing to the same thing. To get cycles, you have to have, things happen to this female character so it doesn't just stay in one place. And then every male needs a mate, every female needs a mate. So it's kind of embedded in the stories.
Awesome. So part of the title of the thing, we kind of just like opened on the thought, but we didn't get to it yet, was Christ refers to himself as the Son of Man, or that he's referred to often as the Son of Man. And Daniel in the Old Testament says there will be a Son of Man that comes. What do you think they're saying when they say like the descendant of Adam, Ben Adam? Like what does Ben Adam mean to you, and why is Christ using that title?
I think Christ is saying, or the symbology that's behind it is that, he is probably a manifestation. He's a representation of the symbology of, at the time, a Son of Man character, and that this Son of Man is kind of like, what I've spoken about before. Or you can think of it as a hybrid character, a God mixed with human character. It's Mercury. Mercury is the child, planet and stuff like that, and is the one that is closest to God, and is the one that can go up and down the ladder, is allowed to go and talk to God, and then allowed to go and talk to Hades, or Satan or Lucifer or whatever, allowed to go up and down the whole thing, and is semi-related, hermaphroditic in its own way and everything. It just has multiple weapons. So if you read all the stories of Hermes and Mercury and all this stuff, it's a very multifaceted character. And when that thing shows up, it's kind of this, that's just like a way of thinking, like the Son of Man is just like all men. You know what I mean? Like it's a mixture of all things, all aspects that man can do, right? What man was meant to be, what God wanted man to be is this very multifaceted being that can, be in any kind of region and adapt to it, can take on all tasks and find harmony and balance within this world. And then those types of characters, will come about, right? But there's going to be a representation trying to show the way constantly through the timeline, and it's like a time god in a way too, because it has the ability to control time and to come into time at very specific times and change things. It's supposed to be a judge during those times and come in and change with the times. And it's an Aeon character. It's called the Aeon, the Great Chronicrator. It's got many titles and stuff. So when Jesus, some people believe, and some people would argue against this, that when Jesus was talking about the Son of Man, and he was asked about it by the apostles, that when is this, time going to happen or whatever, and he said in the millennial generation. So if you look up millennial generation, it'll come up with information on that stuff. I'm saying that it was more than him just saying that. I think it was meant to correlate with the millennials, that there was a time period that is astronomical and meant to be a signpost for those that can understand and see the symbols and discern them, that he was saying that there's this future thing that's going to come, and it's called the Comforter. And so then they'll, I know Christians, some of them would argue, some of them argue that they believe that it's coming this time, and that the Protestants were searching and looking for that. It has a lot to do with the story of why America was what they sought out and why they all came over and all this stuff. And, at least secretly, that they're looking for the chosen land, and they're looking for the coming of this character, and they kept moving west, and this aligns with, secret society beliefs and all that stuff. You can see it embedded in their pictographs and their stories and their symbologies and stuff like that. But you have to have the eyes to see it. You have to be understanding what you're looking for and what it is that they're trying to pass down. And this is why Sir Francis Bacon and the New Atlantis and all the stuff, that this is that chosen land, that they are looking for this God. The Rosicrucians are showing major signs of it. The way they lay out the cities, all this stuff, they're pointing towards where they think this character is going to come. And interesting enough, if one of the other words you can look for like comforting, right, and stuff like that, is to pacify. And, symbolically, there is people that believe that the Pacific Ocean was named that for a reason. It is the pacifier. It is the place the farthest west before you go over the edge or you go back east. That they were looking for a very specific place.
It's pretty comfortable.
Yeah. And, it was meant to be the place where technology was begotten, where Hollywood was begotten. All this stuff is symbolically connected to what these secret societies were looking for and, wanted to create, because they were trying to find a very specific spot. So even the Golden Gate Bridge is over the Golden Gate Strait, and it actually aligns with the Golden Gate of the Milky Way. There's actually pictures. I don't know if I've brought them up and shown them on this channel before, but I have pictures of it where the Golden Gate is, in the Egyptians, is the gate of the gods, right? It's where the God comes through. And so the Egyptians would focus on this a lot. It was a lot about life, death, reincarnation, but also a certain character that they were always looking for that would come out of the Milky Way. And I know I went into that, in our previous chats and stuff like that, where it shows Nut and Geb, and he's actually putting his foot through where what's his name? Anyways, I can't think. Sorry. And then he's putting his hand through, but it's the Milky Way. She represents the Milky Way, and he's putting his foot through exactly where the foot is of one of the astrological constellations, And then where Orion is putting his hand through, he's putting his hand right through that same spot, that it's on these two different spots. And one spot is the golden gate and the other is the silver gate, where humans come through or reincarnated, and where this God comes through and is reincarnated. And it's lined up where the God comes through, and the golden gate is with the galactic center. It's with our galaxy's sun. And so they knew once the sun, our sun, and the galaxy's sun align on a certain time on winter solstice, which is aligns with why they gave Jesus this birthday and everything. And they constantly do throughout history. They give it this winter solstice birthday but it's only when this winter solstice birthday is actually in between Sagittarius and Scorpio, and it's there right now. So that's why they're pointing these things out when you look at it, because those constellations aren't the zodiac. The zodiac is a concept or a mythology or an understanding of what happens during certain seasons. So it's pointing out what kind of energy you're getting from our sun, our solar system sun. The constellations were just in a place at the time when they were recording it that was a backdrop, and so they were marking it. And then if you look at where the secret societies and everything are pointing to, they're saying, okay, once this winter solstice gets over into this constellation, in between these two constellations, where Ophiuchus is, that's what I was trying to think of, is Ophiuchus, where his foot is right on the Milky Way, that lines up dead with the center of the galaxy, where they could see, because they didn't have the light pollution and all that stuff, they can see that the galactic center, like a bigger sun, is there. And so they believe that when that alignment happens, you have the opportunity for this thing to come into our world. They're God. And it's Ra and all that stuff, but it's Kepra. They call it Kepra, which is also associated with Cancer, right? And so if you understand astrology, it's actually the opposite on both sides. So summer solstice and winter solstice are where the sun is lined up behind it, the constellations behind it. So if you're actually closer to Capricorn and you're looking through the sun during the summer solstice, it lines up on the horizon. It'll line up with Cancer across the way. You're actually near Capricorn. So it's actually the opposite thing. So there's a lot of this like weird stuff that you have to kind of know and visualize and see that. And that's where Aditi is, like the nakshatra.
Think about Mother Mary stepping on the Ophiuchus, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Holding down, I would say these energies that are kind of twisted, that fell for a reason, because they were supposed to be very tough and be able to survive being the foundation or the underworld, which is a tough thing to do. But they're also toxic, so they can't be let up. So she has to kind of cover them. And that's, I would say she's the crust of earth and where we get birthed out of. They're showing that symbolically, and that she's holding down some more intense energies that are underground that we shouldn't be interacting with.
This kind of looks like Simhamukha, if you know the Indian depiction, like this Indian cat-looking goddess and the death of ego. It looks very similar.
Yeah, because she shows in all the different spiritual systems, Buddhism and Hinduism and stuff like that. She's multiple different female characters. Yeah, and that's like very similar to Kali. She gets close to Shiva, and he pretends to be dead, and that's the only thing that stops her from complete destruction, is that he's laying there in like a protective mode. The same thing with Geb is shown, Nut and Geb, she's above, right? She's the Milky Way, and then he's laying down as like the layer of protection or whatever. So I don't know exactly why they switch sometimes, like the characteristics and stuff like that, but symbolically I feel like they're just trying to show that there's a form of them helping at one time or another, and it might have to switch back and forth on holding these stronger toxic characters, chaos characters, titans or whatever, under the underground. and not letting them up. And sometimes they slip up, like in the story of Atlantis and stuff like that, right? Supposedly, we let them out by technology that we use. It ended up letting them slip out. And then once Satan figured out that they had started slipping out, then it had to cause this great destruction and pull Atlantis under. And that's why Atlantis disappeared. And then we just keep on trying to get back to this Atlantis. We're trying to get to this perfect place, but do it in balance and not allow, don't destroy ourselves or let these things out too early, is what it looks like. That's what I would say is going on. And so we're allowed to maybe eventually heal them and let them out. And the Buddhists kind of have that concept where they understand that you have to free these sentient beings that are lost in the underworld and stuff like that. And so they use bells to vibrate and send it downwards. And then supposedly the sentient beings can be released. And then the wind blows them across those prayer flags, and that unknots their issues and frees them, right? And heals them, right? So I believe they're supposed to be healed, and that there's a time that'll come when all that can happen, but it has to happen in a certain order. We have to get to a place where we can construct a world that learns how to be fair with each other first before we can ever take on any kind of, spiritual forces that are very clever,
Excellent. I was just checking out. We're just talking about the witch from Medes, the Oracle of Delphi, who made sigils for kings, right? There was and back to like the idea that there were and are even until the witch trials, really important midwives and everything, that at a certain point they start calling them witches and they hunt them down and try to stop those traditions from being, existing or even being available to people that could use that help, right? All of a sudden the Trappist monks are the only ones who are allowed to brew the beer. Wine becomes something that, women used to step on. It starts being controlled by Silicon Valley winery guys who wrote software companies and spent $1 billion so they can have a winery now as a pet project. But a lot of these roles that had to do with medicine or bringing life into the world or dressing the sick or taking care of the dying, like all of these important processes that were always, female roles, right? Like there's a lot of these roles that have been taken over by certain male groups that seem to really shun women from having any part in those groups. They don't want to have women be priests. They don't want to have women be brewers. It's a historical thing.
Yeah, and I think
it's good.
Yeah, I think that somewhat connects to, a lot of different points in history. One of them would be, Henry VIII and his children and his daughters, becoming the first queens of England, right? And then one taking one side. There's always going to be this, split, a divide, one evil, one good. Queen Mary was evil and wanted to kill the Protestants and stay Catholic, and Elizabeth wanted to, forge ahead as a Protestant and, kind of help the people. And a lot of the Protestantism is got connections or influence, or at least they were blamed. And the excuse to kill a lot of them was to say that they're witches and stuff like that. And then, I would say that, we probably had a lot of good witches if they were witches being killed, or just Protestants, or it's an amalgamation, a little bit mix of both. These are people that wanted to not be conquered by another group and told that this is how you should believe is righteous, or whatever religion should be.
I find that really funny because a lot of the religious, like Orthodox and people online that will yell heretic, they're like heretic, heresy, heretic. And it's like, they don't know what that word means. They don't get that Jesus was literally a heretic. And calm down. If you're upset about that, it just proves you don't know the definition of that word, because heretic means one who holds to a doctrine at variance with established or dominant standards, but only since the 14th century. It really comes from the Greek word heretikos, which means able to choose, right? Which is a big point. It's actually, to be a heretic is kind of the opposite of Islam. Islam meaning to be in submission. Hereticos meaning able to choose. So if you like accept Christ into your heart, that's literally hereticos, right?
Yeah,
And if Christ is choosing to follow traditions or to reject apostasy and blasphemy, that's hereticos. So yeah, it's kind of funny because people will use that word to mean the literal opposite. Come on, bro. Yeah. Hey, by the way, Cerebral, I went to follow you and subscribe, and I already did it at some point. So, you know, we're clearly cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess maybe if we have the time, I mean, are we?
Yeah, I guess we're 2 hours deep. Like, you want to do another? What's the like? Go ahead, cover it, bro. You know.
Well, I mean, we could. I have a lot written down here. I usually do, and we're not able to get to a whole lot of it. I don't know if I can just go through and kind of read off like the bullet points, and then we can dive into any of them. So, you know, one of the angles that I was intending to kind of go over and get into is that, you know, Son of Man character, time and place, and how there is evidence to show that they either know the exact time and place, or they believe they know, or they have it close enough, and where that time and place is, how it connects with great conjunctions, triple conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter, and what Saturn and Jupiter represent and why they would be associated with us. They're also called together the great chronocrators, the great time controllers. We can go in a little bit about more of like Superman and why his suit is like you know, reptilian. There's like scales on it, and why it's blue and red, and how that's associated with you know, the Pope and stuff like that. There's the mother symbolism, you know, because we can get in depth of like why is it that California, why is it associated with the gold, where the name Califia comes from, and these would, you know, kind of give more points to that, like why it is that they believe that the character will show up in California, or at least could be like, I'm not stuck on it being specifically, you know, the Kalki or whatever. It could be a previous character to that has to show up. So more like an Antichrist character.
Yeah, Blavatsky for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's all to be interpreted, and people can think of it whatever they want. The Spanish missions associated with this, Jacob's Pillowstone associated with it. We've gone over this before with the Rosicrucians having Jacob's Pillowstone in San Jose. I'm sure a lot of people know about the Dragon Association with the Americas that goes back, you know, the Chinese were obviously here, Asians of all sorts.
The geographic serpent for sure.
Yeah, and why they, you know, always worship the dragon and stuff like that. There's a lot of Dragon Association across the board. We talked about it previously. And then even the mapping of California, there's ancient maps of California that they don't let us know about. There was a show, America Unearthed. I don't know if you ever saw it, but one of his channels, he goes into the finding this wall and the Berkeley Diablo Mountain area of the Bay Area. And from what they could, you know, figure out from it, it looks like the oldest parts of the Great Wall of China, and how this associates to Asians finding this place and why they were looking for it too. So the Easterners went east to find this place, and then the Westerners went west. And there's even old stories, like a Hindu story, where there's this Raja, a king, and he had two sons, and he sent one to the east and one to the west. And he said, eventually down the line, you will find each other, and you got to secretly keep this information. And when you find each other, you know, the children of your children of your children recognize each other, that you're looking for this certain place. And so that place could be a very specific spot that humanity has known for a long time, and it is in the Americas. And, you know,
let's definitely, you know what I'm thinking? Like, do you have time this week? I think this is a great like jumping off point. We should do all of that as the next episode if you have time this week.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Let's do something like maybe like Monday or something if you have time. Do you think you could do it Monday?
I think so. Yeah, let's do that.
Because I want to also send you off. Like, that's a great point for us to to meditate on, and we can talk about those things. And I want you to see the new Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes movie, because it's pretty interesting. Because Disney bought Planet of the Apes and Alien and Fox and all that stuff, and this new movie, it starts out in I guess San Francisco, and then they walk down to, because it's hundreds of years in the future, but there are still some humans left, and they have some kind of underground facility where they're trying to get this data pad, and they have to get to Utah. So this girl who's outside, she has to go by, and you see the LAX, and it's all burnt up, the LAX, right? The airport. And they have to get down to San Diego towards Mexico, which is exactly what, talking about Madame Blavatsky and some of these different esoteric schools talked about. The fifth root race of man, the next generation of man, will ascend out of Baja California or San Diego, a place where the Mormon battalion went, basically the same place that they were trying to discover. And then she takes this hard drive from this underground base, and she has to get it all the way to Utah, where they can stick it into this satellite relay station in Utah, somewhere in Provo in the desert. So, which is interesting, just all the connections, because that's the Salt Lake, which is in between Old Eden in Missouri to the Oregon Trail, which where there was the Pacific Sea interior. So it's an interesting thing to look at, and how I think other people know what you're talking about, that are elite esotericists that work for Disney and are clearly putting that symbolism out there into the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll find it and that's very. They're obviously even coding it with Hanuman, right? The monkey man, right?
Totally.
Kind of
yeah,
and
it's totally Hanuman.
Yeah. I know it's really everywhere once you start seeing it, and you're like, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. They're doing
Yeah, see, that's the thing. The most wicked people that you think in the world, they at least know it, so you might want to know it too. Just know exactly what, because if there's that many Gnostic esotericists that run Disney, and they're putting it in your kids' shows, you better at least know about it, whether or not you like it or hate it. And so I think there's a lot of things about it that are not evil. There's tons of stuff here that's just, these are all of the traditions of the world that have been suppressed or kept secret. Yeah, this is the other thing I wanted to let Raphael kind of bring up, because he was showing me Neon Evangelion.
There's too much to say about it to properly summarize it, but basically it's not an apotheosis story. Have you ever seen Neon Genesis Evangelion, that the whole of Japan, or what is left of it, is crazy about since, I guess, about 97?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it. I think I've seen, my kids, I'm sure, probably watch stuff like this. They like a lot of all these cartoons and stuff, but I
it's totally like a reset civilization with aliens, and you tell it better. Come on.
Well, basically, it is about the Human Instrumentality Project, which very much is about how do you get or force humanity to ascend to a higher plane of existence and essentially become gods themselves. And it's also very much related to this idea of a primal female figure, both in a god angel type sense and also in a narrative wife type sense, so to say, without spoiling too much. And as so often with these things, one might think, the Japanese, it's just a fun comic or something. I do not think so.
Yeah, no, they know too much.
There's a big chunk here where they're talking about, at one point the scientists are they see us as the forbidden fruit. We are the tree of knowledge. Yes, they are the tree of life. Is that right? And so the tree of life has come to destroy the tree of knowledge. And then they have this little boy who they're going to merge with this techno cyber suit, but he's going to become not himself, and he's going to become this new sort of godlike being, because it'll be part of
that's only step one. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. The original series is interesting, but if you want a condensed and slightly altered version, which however finally has some sort of resolution, which the original series did not really have, you can just watch the new movies called Rebuild of Evangelion. It's 4 movies. And then you get basically the condensed version of it. And I think there will be quite a few things. I cannot say how accurately it reflects the known stories like one-to-one, but there are a lot of aspects there, I would say, and it is quite interesting to meditate upon.
Yeah, I that's what I find, like when I come across any kind of information and there is stuff in there where it's like, okay, symbolically, there's no way they're just making this up. You find there's just so many details that are fit exactly with this overall story, which is, yeah, it's a trip every time. Yeah, I'll check that out for sure. That looks awesome. Yeah. And the Japanese, I mean, there's so much that's similar, right? It's kind of,
yeah, all the secret society names are in German, just to give you a hint in terms of Second World War or whatever, remnants and so on.
Yeah, and the Germans connected with the, we went into it a little bit with the Japanese and the guy with the emerald gloves and their connection with the Germans and a lot of esoteric stuff. I mean, we can go on forever, but yeah, we'll talk about that in the next one for sure. That'll be awesome.
Cool, bro. Yeah, let's do it Monday. I'm going to say, Lexi says Thoth calls himself the same as well as Hermetic tradition. The serpent and the mother god are linked. It's the knowledge of cycles, the worldly realm, space and time illuminated by hypnotic gaze and gnosis, very Ophiuchus. Salem is the ancient god of dusk. Salem equals Solomon. The snake as a symbol for the soul, like Kundalini, the one and only transmigrant shedding its skin to the incarnate. Shout out, love you guys. Divulgence will be doing a show again soon. Thanks everybody. I hope you saw our cannibal royalty episode. But yeah, Giant, man, if you guys haven't seen all of the other Giant videos, take a few days and watch all the Water Giant series. We have a playlist on the YouTube channel. We've got like 4 episodes so far. This will be the 5th. So we're past the Trinity, and then we'll be working on the sexology, like Star Wars, on hopefully your free Monday. Let's do it, bro.
Sounds good. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks. All right.
Good night,
See
guys.
you next time.
Yep.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Она образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, your skin's beautiful.
Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномира, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Xirtus. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Xirtus.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.